There is a particular kind of paralysis that isn't fear. It doesn't feel like reluctance or avoidance or the procrastination of someone who hasn't decided yet. It feels more like a conclusion, a flat, reasonable, fully formed certainty that trying isn't worth it. Not because the person lacks ability or courage or desire, but because enough times, in enough places, in enough versions of the same effort, nothing changed, and the nervous system drew the only rational conclusion available to it. In this environment, your actions do not affect outcomes. Trying had a cost. Not trying costs less. So it stopped, not as a choice exactly, as a realization. A very efficient piece of learning, performed without permission, running continuously beneath the surface of a life that can look from the outside like someone who simply doesn't care. From the inside, it looks more like a door you stopped walking towards. Not because you stopped wanting what was on the other side, because enough times you found it locked. In 1967, a graduate student named Martin Seligman was working in the psychology department at the University of Pennsylvania. He and his colleague Stephen Meyer were running what appeared to be a straightforward conditioning experiment, standard learning research. Nothing about it suggested it would change how the field understood depression, motivation, and the long shadow that past environments cast over present ones. The experiment involved 3 groups of dogs. The first group received no shocks, controls. They lived comfortably in their harnesses for the duration of the study and went back to their kennels without incident. The second group received brief electric shocks, unpleasant but not harmful, through a panel in their harness. Crucially, each dog in this group also had a lever. Press the lever, the shock stops. The dogs in Group 2 learned this within a few trials. They were bothered by the shocks. They discovered the lever. They stopped being bothered. The third group received the same shocks as the second group. Identical timing, identical intensity, delivered at the identical moment. What they didn't have was a lever. Nothing they did made any difference. The shocks arrived on their own schedule and ended on their own schedule. The dogs in Group 3 could bark, struggle, resist, pressed at anything they could reach. It didn't matter. The shock stopped when it stopped. After a series of trials, the experiment moved to its second phase. All 3 groups were placed, one at a time, into a different apparatus, a shuttle box, a rectangular enclosure divided down the middle by a low partition. Low enough, in fact, that the dog could step over it with minimal effort. The design was simple. A shock was delivered to one side of the box, the other side was safe. To escape, the dog needed only to step over the barrier. Seligman and Meyer expected all 3 groups to quickly figure this out. The Group 1 dogs had no conditioning to overcome. The Group 2 dogs had learned that their actions could stop shocks. Stepping over a barrier was just another version of pressing a lever. A few seconds, perhaps a minute at most. When the Group 1 and the 2 dogs were placed in the shuttle box, they behaved exactly as expected. Most crossed the barrier within seconds. The rest followed within a minute or 2. Simple, rapid learning. The experiment was working. Great. Then the Group 3 dogs were placed in the box. A shock was delivered to the floor beneath them. The barrier was 8 inches high. They lay down. They whimpered quietly. They did not try to cross. Seligman stood and watched the dog receive a shock it could end by taking a single step and do nothing. The researchers tried to show the dogs what to do. They called to them from the safe side of the barrier. They demonstrated the crossing. In some cases, they physically lifted the dogs over the partition and held them on the safe side until the shock stopped, showing them in the most direct way possible that the other side was different, that here the shock didn't reach. Some dogs crossed after that, many didn't. When placed in the box and shocked again, they returned to the floor, lay down again, whimpered again, as if the demonstration had never happened, as if the safe side of the box didn't exist or didn't apply to them or didn't mean what it seemed to mean. In some cases, it took dozens of guided crossings, physically carrying the dog back and forth across the barrier over and over before the animal would attempt it independently. Seligman noticed something in the behavior that he had not been looking for. The group 3 dogs were not in pain in any way that distinguished them from the group 2 dogs. They were not physically restrained. There was no barrier they could not cross, no lever they couldn't reach, no obstacle between them and the escape that wasn't there for the other groups too. What was different was invisible. It was inside them. He recognized it, not from animal behavior research, from clinical descriptions he'd read in psychiatry journals. The passivity, the flatness, the absence of any attempt to improve the situation. The way the dogs moved through the world, or stopped moving, as though the outcome had already been decided. The group 3 dogs, he concluded, had learned to be helpless, and what they had learned looked, in almost every behavioral detail, exactly like depression. This was the obvious reading, and it satisfied a great deal. Trauma impairs the capacity for agency. Uncontrollable adverse events teach the nervous system that effort is futile. The link between helplessness and depression isn't metaphorical. It is the mechanism. People who grow up in environments where their actions don't reliably affect outcomes don't simply become sad. They lose, at some deep functional level, the operating assumption that trying is worth it. The label fits. The explanation is correct. It just doesn't go far enough. The group 3 dogs didn't malfunction. They learned. More precisely, they drew the most accurate inference available to them from the data they had. In the harness, with no lever, their actions genuinely did not affect the outcome. Struggling cost energy. Struggling produces stress. And struggling changed nothing. The most rational response, the response that minimized suffering and conserved resources in that specific environment, was to stop. The nervous system was not broken. It was doing exactly what a well-functioning nervous system is supposed to do, modeling the environment accurately and adjusting behavior accordingly. The lesson it learned was true, once. This is where the uncomfortable part lives, not in the learning, in what the learning can't do. The nervous system does not automatically recheck its models when the environment changes. It doesn't run a continuous survey to determine whether the conclusions it drew in the harness still apply in the shuttle box. It runs the model it built, and the model it built said, here, in this kind of situation, with this kind of shock, trying does not produce escape. The barrier was 8 inches high. The model said it was a wall. The mechanism is not unique to dogs, and it's not a defect in their species. It exists across mammals because it's adaptive. And animals that continue to fight in situations where fighting is genuinely futile wastes energy, sustains injury, and dies faster than one that accepts inescapability and waits. The capacity to go still, draw effort when effort is genuinely useless, is not weakness. It is the difference between spending your last resources on a battle that cannot be won and surviving to encounter a situation where they can. Learned helplessness is not a failure of the system. It is the system working. A correct reading of a real environment encoded efficiently and carried forward. The problem for humans is where the original environment usually was. Not a laboratory harness, not an experiment with a defined end date and researchers who would stop it if it went too far. For many people, the environment where trying didn't reliably work was a family, a childhood, a relationship where the terms were set before they arrived and no lever they could find made the shock stop. The nervous system drew the right conclusion. The conclusion was true then. It learned the correct lesson for the world it was in. The world changed. The lesson didn't know that. The cage became internal, portable, carried forward into every shuttle box that came after, every situation that looked, in some structural way, like the original. Every door the body stopped walking towards, not because the door was locked, because once enough doors were. Seligman spent the rest of his career trying to answer his own finding. He developed frameworks for changing the explanatory styles that underlie helplessness, the way people narrate failure to themselves, whether they read it as permanent, pervasive, personal. He co-founded an entire field, positive psychology, partly as a counterweight to the implications of that afternoon in the shuttle box. He was not wrong that those things help. But knowing about the mechanism is not the same as being free of it. Understanding that the helplessness was learned does not automatically undo the learning. That would be too clean. What it does is something smaller and more durable. It changes what the paralysis means. Not I am someone who gives up, but I am someone who learned in a specific environment at a specific time that trying didn't work. And that lesson is still running. In places it was never designed for. In situations the original environment never anticipated. The door may be open now. The nervous system doesn't know that yet. That distinction matters, not because it immediately dissolves the flatness or restores the capacity to try or makes the locked doors feel obviously unlocked. It matters because it separates what happened from who you are. The helplessness arrived as a lesson. It was a reasonable, well-informed, accurate lesson about a particular place and time. It was not a verdict. The group 3 dogs, when they finally did cross the barrier, after the demonstrations, after the guided crossings, after dozens of patient repetitions showing them that the other side existed, they crossed. Many of them. Most of them, eventually. Not because they stopped being afraid, because the new data, repeated enough times, began to revise the model.